Beginning the current Daf Mesechta Bava Metzia Daf Pei Zayin. Beginning the second line down at the top of the Amud, where we're continuing with these Agadic teachings, specifically because our Mishnah said Hasirchas Apoilim, someone hires workers, and he says, "Look, we're going to give you food." He says, "Oy vey, tell them quickly, go, just tell me, bring them bread and beans, because even if you give them like Suda Shlem B'Shaita, it's not going to be enough, because they're Bnei Avram Mitzvah Yaakov." And the Gemara explained it proportionately, the Suda of Avram was that much greater. Each malach was getting an ox, so that's a lot of food, and therefore you have to make sure that they're understanding that you're not going to give them that much amount of food. And the Gemara continues with some of the psukim over there with Avram there when he was preparing food for the malachim. Sure, it goes on because Nechezkel turned him Davachaim, Pishon turned today's daf, Shebizchus v'chem they sold in Eretz Yisrael throughout the entire world. Some of the discussed in today's daf are oimer v'oisa, someone who does and says and does, meaning tzaddikim, they say a little and they do a lot. Rishum, they do the exact opposite. They say a lot and they do a little bit. Shalom Shloim Isha, you're allowed to go ahead and greet a woman. Would it be different if you do it through her husband? Lashon Zavnei Shalom, that you're allowed to change the truth. You're allowed to deviate from the truth for the sake of peace. Zikna V'chulsha, this, that there never was such a thing until tzaddikim daven that there should be becoming older and that there should be a weakness. That when it comes to the Minhag Medina, there's like you have to try to find a medium regarding what is the custom for the payment. The next Mishnah continues and says who biblically has a right to eat, and because in the previous Mishnahs we had spoken about Minhag HaMedina regarding eating. So we begin the current Daf Pei Zayin, a second line down at the top of the Yomid. The Gemara says, Ksib, the pasuk says that Avraham Avinu said to the three guests, "The ekcha pas lechem. I'm going to take a loaf of bread, and I'm going to bring you to eat. Sit down." Ksiv, that's what he said. When it says in the pasuk, what he actually did, it says v'labokar ratz Avram, and that to the cattle Avram ran. So Amar Belazi says, "What's haste?" Ezok einzach, and he does under the zach. Yeah, because mikan from the we learn should tzaddikim, the righteous, they say a little bit. Yeah, I'll just bring you some bread. You come, you sit down. Before you know it, they brought you a 7-course meal. Thus is a midah from that tzaddik. But by the Rishonim is punkt verkehrt. Oimrim harbe, they say a lot. Even a little, they don't do it. We don't know this from the Ephraim. Mikarik in the beginning it says when he's discussing when Avraham Avinu wants to buy more samech pelo, and it's arba meya shekel kesef, a land that's worth 400 silver coins. As the pasuk there concludes, Beni bin chamahi, between me and you. Nah, what is it? Yeah, I need to take money from you. Take it bechinim. Oh, besides, it was at the end. So that's what he said. He's talking a lot. At the end it says. V'yishma Avram el Ephron. Avram he heard what Ephron was saying. V'yishka Avram la Ephron is a kesev, and Avram mean to wait out to Ephron the money. Ashadiba wasn't a ches that he spoke in the ears of the children of ches. Arba meir shekel kesev oiver la seicher, 400 silver coins that were oiver la seicher, which teaches you that these were coins. This is currency that was accepted everywhere in their weight. The leishakum in the el kantari, he only took from him Kantari, which is this great weight, it's called centene, which was 100 mana. The ikaduchte the karla latikla kantira, because there are certain places they call the weight kantira. I mean, these were the highest, the most valuable coins. He took 400 of those. So we see the Rishon, the Oimim Harbe, they say a lot, but even a little bit, they don't do. A punk verkehrt from the Midah of Avram. Now, continuing over there in the parsha, so Ksiv it says Kemach. Avram Avinu hat gesagt. I mean, it says Avram Avinu went to run to Sarah, and he said, "Mahari, quick, shloish sim Kemach soiles lushi vasi ugars." So Avram Avinu said Kemach, but Ksiv it says there also soiles. So soiles is better than Kemach. So what was he bringing them? Was it fine flour or was it kemach? So Rabbi Yitzchak he says, "Mikan from here we see isha tzorei nel ba'orchin yotzim ish." A woman, her eyes are more begrudging on gas more than a man. Meaning she said kemach, he said soilis. So that's why it says both terminologies where she was like, nah, what do the guests need? Whatever, And he's like, no, the guest gets the best. Yeah. Right, yeah, right. Right. You're asking, right. You're asking, how does the Gemara know that? Doesn't say, but that's what Rashi says. He amr kemach, she's the one who said kemach, and then he went and told her, bring silas, and it's interesting how you see that in the pasuk itself, and so you see that the woman is more begrudging. She is not as generous with the guests. Like Siv, it also says there in the pasuk, lushi, need, v'asi ugois, make cakes. Ksiv, what does it say? It says when he finally brought the meal to the malachim, it says v'yikach chema v'chalav v'benabak. It says that he took the butter, the milk, and the young animal. It doesn't say anything about the bringing of the bread. What's happened? Some Ephraim Ekshah, who was Talmid from Meir, he said Mishmei the Meir. Avram Avinu oichel chulin mitahara. He was someone who ate his chulin, even unconsecrated food, in the state of purity. Our mother Sarah, that day she had her period. She became back to get a menstrual cycle because again she was being primed for having a baby, even though she was 90 years old, and therefore the dough became tummy, and therefore that's why it was not served on that day. Now it says, "V'yimer love." They said to him, "Ayeh sarashtecha, where is Sarah your wife?" V'yimer, and Avram said to the three men, "Hine boil, behold, she's in the tent." This comes to teach that she was very discreet, modest, and therefore she was in the tent. Now, actually, that's not just teaching us, but what do you mean? The ministering angels knew, even though they wanted to give it a bracha or whatever, they knew that she was in the tent. So what does this mean in the tent? They wanted to endear her onto her husband to let him know that she's more discreet than the rest of her friends, that she's not seen, and you have to ask where she is, meaning to say, what do you mean? Now, don't you know that women are in the tent? No, was heißt? Andere Frauen, the Galavanting in the Gassen. Oh, Taka, I didn't know. So therefore, is that letting him know that his wife is something special, and therefore he becomes more endeared with her. He says, no, the reason why they asked him where she is because they wanted to pass her the kais of the bracha, and there's a segula in that, and therefore they wanted to know where she is, that they could pass her that cup of wine. Now, they told in the Bryce Nimmer B'yesi, Lama Nokod al Ayash Be'elav. Why is it, if you look at a Sefer Torah, that on the word Elav, the letters Aleph Yud Vav, everything besides the Lamed, has a dot on top of it? Why is it that there are dots on that? Says the Gemara, Lim the Torah derech eretz, because the Torah is teaching you a proper conduct. Sheishol Odom Bachsan Yeshalai, that a person should ask regarding his host. Meaning, the way Rashi explains, is that the dots on Ayoy, which is really like Aye, as we'll see in the second Tesis finds this a little difficult, is that they didn't really have to ask. They knew she was Ba'ayil. But they were asking regarding the wife of the host as an appropriate type of a conduct. Because anytime you have a dot, it uproots that word that it's only for a drasha. And from this, Darshtei Derech Eretz, which is, that's what it sounds like from Rashi. Taisus brings from the Medrash that the same idea that the dots are on Ayoy and not on the Lamed. So the Medrash says, Rabbi Shimon says, wherever you find that the letters are more than the ones that have the dots, so you darshan the letters and not the ones with the dots. Here, where the dotted ones are more, you darshan the dotted ones, which was Ayoy Avraham. What does it mean, Ayoy Avraham? So Rabbi Zariah says, just like they said to Avraham, Ayoy Sarah, so too they said to Sarah, Ayoy, where is Avraham? But he said, according to Rashi, that he explains that because that's why it's dotted, that really they didn't have a reason to ask him, but it was just to teach this idea of derech eretz. He says the dot shouldn't be on ayoy. It should have been on the words ayei Sarah, because that was the ikar shaila that they asked him regarding. So again, it's not clear according to Rashi, but al kapanim, this is why there's dots to teach you that a person should ask, oh, was macht the Frau, was macht the Bnei Bayis, as a marif, this, you know what I'm saying? The proper conduct. So it says the Gemara, but Shmuel says, Ein Shloimy Schwartzberg. How could that be? Really? That they were asking Avram, was macht the Vab? You're not supposed to ask about how a woman's doing. Says the Gemara, no, they Baal Shani. Through her husband is different. They're not asking her how she's doing. They're asking the husband, was macht the Geveret, ma shalom ha Geveret, how's your wife doing? Because Taisa explains. He says, it's dafka to ask, how is she doing? But you're not supposed to ask the husband to ask her, as the Gemara says, the Kedushin of Einim Abeis, that you can't even ask him to ask her. Said, ask your wife how's she doing, this and that. It's only to ask him how she is doing. Now, the pasuk says that, as we know famously, but Titzchak Sarah, Bekirba Lema, Sarah started laughing, and she said, Achri Belaisi, after that I'm all worn out. Haisli Edna, I'm going to have this youthfulness. I'm being told I'm going to have a baby. Amr of Chizdi says, Achash and Nisbala Habasar. What she was saying was, after the flesh is worn out, but Abba Kamatim, there's all these creases. The Sadna Basar, the flesh is going to suddenly shine. And the Spashtu Hakamatim, and the creases are going to, the Botox is just going to come like flatten out. And the beauty is going to come back to its place. That's what she was like. She found that humorous. Like Siv says in the pasuk that she said, "V'adoini zaken, my master is old." Uksiv, but it says when Hakadosh Baruch Hu said to Avram Avinu, complaining what Sarah said, that she said, "Vani zakanti," that I'm old. Hashem did not respond to Avram the way she actually said. So what do you learn from this? Tan Rabbi Shmuel, God will shalom, her greatest peace. People are emes, they think emes, you always have to say the truth. It's not true. No pun intended. There's even HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, he himself changes. That sometimes the lie is a truth and sometimes the truth is a lie. Somebody says in the pasuk, that Sarah laughed in our midst and she said, "V'adoini zaken, my master is old." And it said, and Hashem changed what she said from that my husband's old to saying that I'm old. Now, V'timer, she said, "Mi mile Avram." Who's going to say to Avram, "Hinika banim Sarah," that Sarah will nurse banim, children? So the question is, Kama banim hinika Sarah? How many children did Sarah nurse? What are you talking about? She only had one son. Why is this like in this like surprising of like sons? So Rabbi Levi says this is referring to Isa Yom Shegamla Avram Avinu es Yitzchak b'nai. On the day that Avram Avinu weaned his son Yitzchak from his mother's nursing, Asasu the Gedolah made a great meal. It's a discussion exactly when exactly this was. What was the great meal? So all the nations of the world were murmuring and saying, this is like the United Nations. Anytime it happens with a Jew, they make a whole tumult. You see an old man, an old woman, they bring in a child that was gathered in, meaning that Sufi is a child that they find in the street. They don't know whose it is. And whoever finds it, he gathers it into his house. So they adopted a child. From they say, this is our child. What a joke, what a galech, the way thing these old bubbies and zaydis, suddenly they had a baby. Not only that, look, they're making a party because they want to substantiate it. They want to show it, what a galech that they're claiming that they had a child. So what did Avram Avinu do? He went and he invited all the great ones of the generation. Asar Meinu invited their wives. Each one of them brought their child with them. But their nursemaids, of course, they all have wet nurses, all these the butlers and the live-ins and whatever. They didn't bring their wet nurses. And the miracle happened with Sarah Meinu. And her breasts opened up like two springs. V'nikas kulin, she nursed them all. Because obviously the non-Jewish, they're not going to nurse. And the Jewish mamala, not only she nursed them all. Now, by then, they were still murmuring and saying, okay, look, look, fine, Sarah, maybe when she was 90, she gave birth. Avraham ben Meir Shana Yelid, which is a joke, obviously, as we see the United Nations, everything's a joke. What, 90-year-old, yes, but 100, yeah. Who said, yeah, it can't be, 100-year-old man, he definitely didn't have a baby. So right away, what happened is that the form of the face of Yitzchak changed b'nidmal Avraham, and it resembled Avraham. Paschu kulam v'amru, all of them opened up and they said, Avraham, like the pasuk says, Haylidis Yitzchak. Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. Then it was already, even the United Nations couldn't deny the truth. Now, related to this idea, actually, the Gemara says, Ad Avraham l'hay zikna. Until the days of Avraham, there was no idea of getting old. You looked the way you looked. The problem was, now when it came to Avraham, when whoever wanted to speak with Avraham, Yitzchak was speaking with Yitzchak. Whoever wanted to speak about Yitzchak was speaking with Avraham, again, because they looked the same, and no one got older. It's not like you have the older version of those apps that make you look like when you're like 90, right? So like you look the same. So once you get a Bava Metzia, and then no one knew who to speak to. So Avram came and he besieged mercy. It's interesting that it bothered him so much, I guess, that Yitzchak's friends came to him and Avram, they went to Yitzchak. Such a grace that he had to daven mercy that now for the rest of time, we all become El Yidin with the Vasa Boods, with the whatever. But that they should recognize, he beseeched mercy, he recognized between him and his son. And then it became this idea about becoming old. Like it says in the pasuk, the first time in the Torah, Avram Zakim Baba Yom, Avram got old. It was coming of days. Now, there was another phenomenon. Ad Yaakov lo havachusha. Until the days of Yaakov, there was no such thing about becoming weak. You had the same vigor until the day that you died. You have these 90-year-old guys pushing, iron. But also Yaakov, by Yerachmi, Yaakov came and he beseeched mercy. And that created this idea that people will become weak before they die, so that they could go ahead and start telling their family members, Machtat Savua, start giving over. Somebody says in the pasuk, and they said to Yosef, behold, your father is sick, he's on his last leg, which people didn't know, people just die. But now they start getting weak, and you say to tzaddikim, I feel like I'm on my last leg, I want to give over. That was Yaakovin who davened for that. Now, Ados Elisha, until Elisha came along, there was no one that ever got sick and then was healed. Elisha, he was the first one. He davened and he was healed. It says Elisha became sick with the sickness that ultimately he died from. Well, the difference is the chala achriti, something that he had other illnesses that he didn't die from. And that was this phenomenon. Talking about in the Bryce that shleisha chala and chala Elisha. There was 3 illnesses Elisha had in his lifetime. Echad, one of them was because that he pushed away Gichazi with 2 hands, with the 2 hands. You're not supposed to. Small doichav min mekarev. You don't take someone who's talking during davening, a guy who is doesn't showing up for shiur and whatever. Mishtipt him avek. No, you have to do it. That was one illness he got. Echad shegida doivin b'tinaikis. One of them was that he had the bears that attacked the little children, which is a different story that the Gemara brings elsewhere. And one of them was the one that he died from. Elisha became sick with the illness that ultimately he died from. Now, we said in the Mishnah that we had a story that he hired workers, and he said, Tatala said, quickly, until they don't start working, go tell them that no, you're only going to get bread and beans from me, because if you don't tell them, even through the Shlem B'Shait is not going to be enough. Now the Gemara asks, he says, how do you read the words of the Mishnah? Pas kitnis tnan? Is it bean bread? Pas v'kitnis tnan? Or is it bread and beans? Which sounds like a very interesting question if we didn't have Taisus. Tais, however, explains, he says, the Gemara knew that the story that the Mishnah was bringing from Rabbi Yechon, what he said to his son. Of course, he said to his son, bread and beans, not bean bread. The question the Gemara is asking is, the word is tanan. The focus is, what did the Mishnah say? Because we want to know, did the Mishnah say pas kitnis without a vav? What do you mean? Wouldn't that be translated as bean bread? No. I would know it means bread eaten with beans. And it wouldn't mean bean bread. And the reason for that is because people don't usually make bean bread. What's a nafkamina? Someone says that he should give to his workers pas kitnis. If those are the words he uses, you would have to give bread with beans. Or maybe, no. Maybe the words in the Mishnah is with a vav, that it said pas vikitnis. Because if a person would say, give my workers pas kitnis without a vav, that would mean bean bread. And that's all you're giving. That's the shaila meaning. We know the story. What did the Mishnah say? To say, what would we say when the guy says without a vav? Would that mean that you give bread with beans, or then you would give bean bread? So Amalei said to him, Kim, by God, tzricha vav. It needs a vav. Kimoiduya, like you have the this was a piece of wood that the captain that would lead the ship to distance it from the stones and from the other things that get stuck in the river. Like, as long as that stick, which is what a vav is the livros of the name of the river. Livros that, yeah, for sure that you have to have a vav, which again, according to Taisus, would sound like that. Yes, it's if a guy says pas vikitness, but if he says pas kitness, then okay, it would be bean bread, and that's what you would give the workers. Now, we said in the Mishnah that Shimon ben Gamliel, he says, no, ain't it tzarech? What are you doing? You don't have to go and tell them that we're giving you just bread and beans. Everything was according to the custom of the country. You're not going to have to give him kesud shlim b'shaita, even though the bnei Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov. It says hakol, so you might, when he says the word hakol, why just say kibbutz medina? What's hakol? Sounds like it's including something. So you did not come to include what we learned actually in the Brisa. Someone hires a worker, and the balabai says to him, look, your wages are on me, like 1 and 2 of the members of the city. So what does that mean? So means like other workers of the city. Like 1 or 2, like how other people would be. So the first town that holds says, okay, you give them the least amount of how much people get hired for, because minimum wage is where the Yisrael minimum wage comes up from, which is like, how people are, the least amount. But they say, we evaluate the median, not more, not less. Rather, Kiminig Medina means Baininess, somewhere in the middle. And that's what we're learning out from Hakol Kiminig Medina to teach this idea that he pays him the average wage. Look at the next Mishnah regarding this halach of the workers, that the Elu and these workers, Eichlin, they eat from what they're engaged in, min ha-Torah, from biblical halacha. Like Taisa explains, because we opened up Haserich HaSapoilim. We were talking about before regarding workers eating, because you had set what you're going to give them to eat, or because of Minig Medina. So therefore we say, but these, they eat min ha-Torah without making up with them, without any custom. This is a biblical halacha, which is, if someone's working on something that's attached to the ground, bishas gmar malacha, at the time when the process is being finished, meaning when you're tearing it out from the ground, then the guy could be eating what he's working on. Ubetalish minakarka, something that's detached from the ground, guys work in the canteen. That's only if the thing was not finished for the process of meiser, or if let's say something is something that would be chayv and chala, until you didn't finish its activity to be chayv and chala. What's the reason for these ideas in the Mishnah? So the Gemara is going to explain the sources from Pesukim. Now, the Mishnah qualifies that we said that something that's talish minakarka, it's only until there wasn't the Gemara Malacha, is Torma Ubedavish Gedulim in the Aretz. And that specifically, it pertains only to foods grown from the ground, which is now detached. You could only eat if it wasn't yet Mechuyev in Meiser or in Chala. Now, these are things that the workers cannot eat from the employer's food, is really the inverse. If you're working on something that's attached to the ground, as you continue, when it's not yet finished the process, for example, let's say he's weeding out onions, as the Gemara says later on the Pei Testament Aleph, and regarding the other category, when it is detached from the ground, once the process has already been obligated in Meiser. For example, let's say that you're separating pieces of a cake of figs. The Mishnah talks about Naftzad Gimel and Aleph, which that was already mechuyev. You just now it got separated and you're working on it again. And the third of all, something that does not grow from the ground. For example, let's say someone is milking the cows. You cannot drink some of that milk, or you're making cheese. That's something that's not growth from the ground. Those are items that he cannot work from as he's working. Says Gemara, where do we know this halacha that a worker could eat from something that's attached to the ground as it's being pulled out, as it's on, like we said, by the Gemar Malacha? It's a pasuk in Devarim. It says, when you're going to come into the vineyard of your friend, and you're going to eat the grapes, which Gemara later on is going to darish and it's talking about by a worker, which the end of the pasuk says, that you should not be putting into your own bowls. It sounds like meaning because you're putting into the bowls of the employer. Obviously, it's the Gemar Malacha of when it was attached, meaning it's being detached right now, and you're starting to put it into containers. At that point is when you could eat. Okay, says Gemara Ashkach and Karen. The pasuk only talking about a vineyard and grapes. Kol milah minolan. How do you know any type of vegetation, any type of growth? You could do this. So what do you mean? This is called a mamatzinu. A gemrini mekarim. We'll learn from a vineyard. Just like a vineyard is distinct as davar shegiduli karka. It's why it grows from the ground. And when the process is being finished, by the worker eat from it. Okay, I've called davar shegiduli karka. Anything that grows from the ground. When you're finishing the process, the worker eat from it. Says no, you can't just learn from there. There's certain chumrah that applies to it. Malakam, we find by a vineyard, it's obligated in the little grapes that fall off that you have to give it to the poor. That's something that's unique about grapes. Who said it would apply to all other types of vegetation? Says Gemara, no, Gamrini Mikama. We would learn that from the standing grain, which doesn't have oilais, and it also has this heter of the workers eating. Says Gemara, wait a second, Kama Gufim Manala. How do you know that standing grain? We just spoke about Kerem. How do you know standing grain has this heter of the worker? Says Gemara, there's a pasuk after that. It says Kisav becomes when you come into the standing grain of your friend. And so and that you're gonna take some of that and roll some of those kernels in your hand, and the pasuk says over there v'chermish leisanef, and the sickle you're not going to lift up. Obviously, we're talking about the time of the chermish of the sickle when you're harvesting it. So yeah, that we see that standing grain you could also eat. So you see, it's not a distinct principle of melilos, and therefore you could learn out from kama. It says, yeah, but malakama, how are you going to learn that from the standing grain? You can chayev b'chala. We know wheat is something that's obligated in challah, and therefore it has a distinct halacha. Maybe there is where we have the heter of the worker eating from it. Says, wait a second, my daikama, who said the standing grain is kama de mischay b'chalahi? Who said it's a type of grain that's obligated in challah? Maybe we're talking about any standing stalk, which it could be referring to rice also. It could be referring to anything that is a stalk that doesn't have challah. Who said the heter of the worker eating is only for something that is like this distinct halach of challah? Says no, that I'll tell you why. Because asi kama, we have a gzeir shava from the word. The one who's asking is because he has gzeir shava to ask and to say that I could tell you that the pasuk was only talking about something that's chayav and challah. For example, the standing grain of a type of a grain. But by the standing stalk of let's say beans, then you wouldn't, because ksivach, it says over here in the pasuk that we're bringing kisav b'kamas re'acha. When you're going to come into the standing stalks of your friend, uksiv hasav, it says over the pasuk in Devarim, it says shiva shavuos tis balach, we're talking about shavuos. 7 weeks you're going to count. When do you start counting the 7 weeks of Sfira Soimer? Mahochel chemesh bekama. For when the sickle started knocking down in the standing grain, which that's the carbon oimer, which is brought on Pesach, which comes from the barley, which is chayav b'chala. So we see mahasim kama de mechayav b'chala. Just like the word kama is referring to something that's chayav b'chala, because that's barley. Avachanami kama de mechayav b'chala. So also here when it says kama, it refers to that which is chayav b'chala. So therefore, there's the Gemara. This is my question. You could ask, how are you learning out that the worker could eat from kama? Well, kama has a distinct halach of challah. Who said it applies to everything else? So the Gemara, a vineyard will disprove that because grapes don't have halach of challah. So yeah, but malakem, we learn from kem because it has distinct halach of oilis. So the Gemara, kama will disprove that. That's not the mind principle. That's what's called a chazar din. That the logic goes back and forth. This one's primary idea is not like this one's primary idea. Okay, so that can't be the main idea. So we go with Hatzal Shavash Shaben. What's the common denominator? Something that grows from the ground. And when you're finishing the work, by the work from it. Anything that grows from the ground, when you're finishing the work, by the work from it. So that's how we know this halacha that the worker could eat from it. Says the Gemara, wait a second. Even the common denominator is limited because they both have an element that goes onto the mizbeach. You have wine that's for the nesachim, and the soilis is for the menachis. So okay, one more I could include is an olive. Could be included from this logic. This beitzat mizbeach, it also has an element of going on the mizbeach, which is the oil that's used for the flour things of the menachis. But all of the trees and the vegetation, I would say no, there's no heter for a worker. So the Gemara jumps in and says, wait, I need to include an olive from the common denominator? I need to learn it from a drasha? What do you mean? It's included in the hakerem itself. Who gufe kerem ekerunin? Zayis is called vineyard, and the pasuk says kerem riacha. That's like the pasuk in Shaftim. It says v'yivim megadish v'adkama v'kerem zayis, that they destroyed from the gadish till from the piles till the standing grain until the olive grove. So you see that it's called kerem. So my Papa says no, kerem zayis ikri. An olive grove is called kerem zayis. Kerem stamala ikri. When it says kerem, that only means a vineyard. It means grapes. Okay, fine. Let's have to learn zayis from a ma'atzad. But kasha, but it's difficult. You can't learn that from even kama and from the kerem, because they have a common denominator that doesn't apply to all other seeds. Say Allah Mashmul, the other Shmuel says you're right. Amakra, I know it from a different source. It says v'chermish, when it talks about the sickle, is l'rabis kol bal chermish. Any crop that's cut with a sickle is being included. So says the Gemara, how could you say that you learn from chermish? By chermish mibayile, but you need chermish to teach you something else. To teach you b'shas chermish, at the time of the sickle, which is the Gemara Malacha, that's teaching you achel, then you could eat. Shaloi b'shas chermish leiteicha, but it's not at the time of the sickle you can't eat. That's what chermish is teaching you. How could you tell me it's using it to include all types of things that are cut with a sickle? So Gemara, no, it's not true. Hahu, that halacha that you're asking from, mevel keli chaleisiti nafka, that we learn out that, make sure you don't put it into your purse, make sure you don't put it into your knapsack. This is only allowing you to eat. You can't. It's not cash and carry. This is not allowing you to put it into your stuff, which, as we learned before, later on the Gemara is going to darshan it. That's teaching us it's at a time when it's being put into containers. That's the time when it's being cut. So it says the Gemara, okay, fine, but tenech devar chermish. But still, you're only including something that is used with a sickle. For example, like beans. The lav bar chermish, but something that's not used with a sickle. For example, when you're harvesting olives, or when you're harvesting dates, or like Tais says, like trees, then what do we know from? Those things are not used with a sickle. So those things shouldn't have the heter of the worker eating. So okay, Elam Yitzchak says, okay, a different source. Amakra, the pasuk says kama. What does kama come to teach us? L'rabba is called bali kaima. Comes to teach us all things that stand erect from the ground. So everything's included because that's how vegetation grows. Says Gemara, but you said, I thought you said you need kama to teach something else. Kama. Didn't you need it for Gzeira Shava, Mechayev B'chala, to say that just like kama over there by the Omer, where someone is Chayev B'chala, so too over here. So you already used it when you asked from the Gzeira Shava that kama is referring to somebody that's Chayev B'chala. So the Gemara says, no. Hanimili, when did we say that we were using that as a question? That was Mekmei Denesi Chermish. That was before we said that we learned it from Chermish to include beans, which is used to cut with a sickle. Hash Chermish, now that we're darshni Chermish. So we don't have a Gzeira Shava to limit it to something that's Chayev B'chala, because we already know from Chermish that's even things like beans. So it's rabbi called Devar Chermish. I already know all things that are used with a sickle. So obviously it's even something that's not Chayev B'chala. So then, Kama Lomali, so what do we need Kama for? Because I'm not using Gzeira Shava. Rabbi, it's called Bala Kaima, to include anything that has any height, which includes olives and dates and all these things that I know that the worker could eat when he's harvesting it. It says, wait a second. Now, okay, now that you tell me that you learned this out from Chermish and Kama, that Chermish tells me things that are cut with a sickle. And Kama teaches me all other things that have a height like a tree. So then kisarve become re'echa lamali. Then why did I need the pasuk to tell me when you come into a vineyard, I don't need karim. It could just say kisarve, as Tai says, b're'echa. I already know karim from all these other sources. Why would you say karim? So Rabbi says this. You're right. This whole pasuk is actually teaching you lihul chaysab. It's teaching you halachas. Every word in this pasuk teaches you another halacha, and that's why it says bekarim as one of the items. Kitan like learn the brisa. First, it says kisavai. It says when you're going to enter. So nemekan bi. It's saying a terminology of entry. Why? Because when halon, it says elsewhere, a pasuk in Devarim, it says b'yomi titin schachay. It says on the day when the guy works, you should be paying him his wages. It says lo yisavay olav hashemesh, and that the sun shouldn't set, which teaches you, or the sun shouldn't come. But one thing is when it says the word coming, just like over there, the pasuk talking about a worker. Here also it's talking about a worker, meaning if you read the pasuk literally, it sounds like you could walk in the guy's vineyard, not like this week's parasha of Shemitah. You could walk in the guy's vineyard, you could eat. No, we're learning out from kisavai. It's just like over there, like savai. Just like over there is a worker. Here, so we're talking about a worker. Okay. When it says bekerem ri'echa, that you come into your friend's vineyard, and that's what the pasuk is saying that velkeli cholisiten, that you shouldn't be putting into your own containers, but it teaches you v'lo bekerem kuti. But that halacha does not apply by the kerem of a non-Jew. A kerem of a non-Jew, you actually could be stuffing it into your knapsack, into your bags. Says, wait a second. This drasha makes sense. Hanich l'man da'amar. This makes sense according to the one who says, which Rashi says, Tay says, no, that's only with Hafkos Halva. Tay says it's somewhere else. But be that as it may, that only makes sense according to the one who says, Gezel Kuti Aser, that in general, stealing from a non-Jew is forbidden. Hind it's a kral, the mishipos. That's what you need a pasuk to say. But a worker who's working at the bake shop and the non-Jewish owner, he's stuffing his face between customers, that you can tell me that he's permitted to do it. But according to one who says stealing from a non-Jew is permitted, if stealing is permitted, do I need to tell you that a worker could be eating? It wouldn't make sense to make such a drasha of ri'echa b'loishal kuti. So rather, that madam would be mukim lo b'kerem ri'echa. He would say that the pasuk is telling you that your friend's vineyard b'loishal hektish, and not that of hektish, because by hektish, then you would be forbidden to be eating from it, even when you're harvesting it. Now, when it says in the pasuk v'yachalta that you're going to eat, what does that teach? B'loy maitzitz, that you're not allowed to suck out the wine from the grape and throw away the grape peel. It's only if you eat. It's like when you tell the kids, no, they can't lick off the cream from the rice cake. You have to eat the whole thing with the cream on it. So you could only eat it. You can't suck out the juice. And when it says anavim, that you're eating the grapes, is v'loy anavim v'davar acher. It's telling you only the grapes, but not the grapes in something else. Meaning, you cannot dip the grapes into like salt to sweeten it, because then you're going to be eating a lot. That's a Rashi learns. There's a discussion on this. But I'll upon him that it has to be only the grapes itself. You can't make it, something that you're going to spice it up and it can make you want to eat more. And when it says you're going to eat the grapes kanavshecha as to your heart's desire, that what does it say kanavshecha? As if it's your own, which teaches us it's comparing Kinefesh shel balabai is like the desire of the employer, is kach nafshe shel poel is the same thing of how the worker is, which teaches you ma nafshecha, just like if you want oichel pater, you could eat from your crop and your pater from meiser because it wasn't yet nigmar malachta la meiser yet, because the Mishnah teaches Masechet meisers it's only a chayiv a meiser when the wine is already in the vat. So just like you, the owner, if you want to eat your pater, af nafshe shel poel, so to the worker, oichel pater. He could also eat and be pater from meiser. Why would the worker be chayiv? Rashi explains, we don't say that since he's eating it because of the work that he's doing against the will of the employer, in a way it's like a mekach, like a purchase. And the mekach, a purchase, actually obligates meiser, even something that's not nigma malach meiser, as the Gemara says in Be'edav Lamehei. So, because once you're purchasing it, that's like an achshave, it creates a significance. That's the chiddush that we're saying that no, that's not going to be a problem, that the worker could also eat without separating meiser. When it says in the pasuk again, you could eat to your heart's content. Savecha, that you're satiated, teaches us v'lo echila gasa, but not something that's overeating, because that's beyond seviyah. When it says in the pasuk "V'alkelecha le'sitein," that to your own vessels you shouldn't put it, teaches us b'shah. We're talking about a time that when you're putting it into the owner's containers, then at the oichel, then you could eat again, which is b'shas the gemar malacha. But a b'shah you have to nois lekev shabalabayis. But if it's not a time that you're putting into the containers of balabayis, then you have to oichel. Then you cannot eat. Thank you to any time for hosting us.